Welcome to an entry dated June 5, 1944, written aboard Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel Number 12, anchored in the English Channel. The handwriting is uneven, the ink blurred by salt. The sea is restless tonight. The engines never stop. Every man stares ahead, but there is nothing to see. This single page comes from the field diary of Lieutenant Charles H. Bradley, 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, U.S. Army. It survives in the U.S. National Archives Record Group 407, World War II, operations reports catalogued among thousands of fragmented field notes and situation summaries. There is no commentary, no revision, only the words of a man waiting for orders that would define history. The weather is worse than they said. We've been told to hold position until 0400. Someone said the storm might save us. I don't believe it. The next line, half erased by water, reads simply, "If this is the last page, then it will have to do." June 1944. The English Channel. A cold front from the northwest pushes waves 6 feet high. More than 5,000 vessels drift in formation under clouded skies. Radio silence is maintained. The order of assault issued under Operation Neptune remains unchanged. Naval groups OU and G maintain position. Infantry divisions of the U.S. First Army, the 1st and 29th, prepare to land on the sector codenamed Omaha. Engines vibrate through the hulls. Diesel fumes mix with sea spray and the sharp smell of oil. The men have been awake for nearly 20 hours. Beyond the darkness lies the French coast, invisible, fortified, and waiting. Somewhere above, weather reconnaissance aircraft circle in turbulent air. The latest report transmitted to SHAEF headquarters at Southwick House reads, "Wind speed steady at 15 to 20 knots. Cloud ceiling variable. Conditions marginal but acceptable for invasion. It is the eve of D-Day. Every instrument, every engine, every human pulse in this vast operation stands balanced between command and chaos. Before we begin, leave a comment with where you're watching from and the exact minute you pressed play. What would you have written waiting in the dark as the sea kept moving and the orders finally came through?" The diary attributed to Lieutenant Charles H. Bradley is one of the few first-hand documents surviving from the American assault on Omaha Beach. It is part of a compiled record identified as the 29th Infantry Division Field Materials accessioned into the U.S. National Archives under Record Group 407. The collection includes field reports, after-action summaries, unit rosters, and a small number of personal notebooks recovered from the Normandy battlefield between June and August 1944. The specific diary attributed to Bradley was transferred from the European Theater Historical Section to the U.S. War Department in late 1945. Then catalogued for permanent retention in 1948. It consists of a small waterproof notebook, black canvas cover, approximately 20 pages, most of which are blank or water-damaged. Only 6 pages contain legible writing. The handwriting was authenticated through comparison with his officer qualification form, which lists his service number as 0130716. No official record indicates that Bradley survived the landings. His name appears on the casualty roster of the 116th Infantry Regiment with the notation "Missing in Action, June 6, 1944. The diary was first referenced in an internal memorandum from the U.S. Army Historical Division dated October 12, 1945. The memorandum states that several notebooks and letters were retrieved by the Graves Registration Service near Vierville-sur-Mer and forwarded for analysis. The entry identifies Bradley's notebook by a small brass identification tag attached to the cover. In 1951, the notebook was transferred to the National Archives for long-term preservation and microfilming. It was not widely cited until the late 1970s, when historians conducting a comprehensive review of primary sources for the U.S. Army's Green Book series cross-referenced it with battalion reports from the same period. The purpose of the original document was never literary or reflective. It functioned as an officer's field notebook, a tool for brief operational notes, time references, and unit conditions. The absence of coordinates, orders, or tactical remarks suggests that Bradley used it for personal observation rather than command purposes. Such notebooks were common among platoon-level officers who maintained simultaneous personal and official records. Regulations in effect during 1944 required that all unit journals and diaries be submitted to headquarters for compilation. Personal notes, however, remained the property of the writer unless recovered posthumously. The location of origin is verified by contextual references within the diary itself and by corresponding movements of LCVP-12 listed in the Assault Group 02 movement table. The craft departed from the transport USS Samuel Chase on the evening of June 5th with troops of Company A 116th Infantry Regiment. Weather reports, compass readings, and sea conditions described in the notebook match those recorded in the official Task Force O war diary. The cross-verification of these data points supports the authenticity of the entry as a contemporaneous record rather than a reconstruction. The transcription used today derives from a microfilm reproduction created in 1951 on Kodak safety film. The original notebook remains in archival storage under controlled temperature and humidity in College Park, Maryland. The ink, identified as a standard Army-issue carbon-based black, has resisted fading but shows spreading along water-damaged fibers. A complete facsimile was digitized in 2012 for the National Archives Digital Repository and later included in the Voices from the Front project by the U.S. Army Center of Military History. The English text is unchanged. No translation was required, though orthographic standardization was applied in the published transcript to clarify partially illegible sections. Each altered word is annotated in brackets in the archival file. Other documents referenced in relation to Bradley's diary include the battalion's after-action report for June 6-8, 1944, filed by Major Sidney Bingham, and a radio communication log from the USS Samuel Chase. The report lists Lieutenant Bradley as a platoon leader under Company A, noting that his unit suffered over 60% casualties within the first hour of landing. No subsequent mention appears in any surviving operational message. His personal effects were recovered 2 days later among debris near Vierville Draw, identified by serial number tags and a waterlogged M1911 pistol. The broader archival context situates Bradley's diary among hundreds of similar artifacts, fragments of record-keeping that form the empirical foundation of historical reconstruction. Between 1944 and 1946, the U.S. Army undertook systematic collection of written materials from the European theater under the Captured Documents and Historical Records Program. The aim was to consolidate first-hand accounts, not for commemoration, but for analytical evaluation of tactical performance and logistical efficiency. Many of these records remained classified or unexamined until the 1960s, when the National Archives initiated open access to microfilm series M10-13 World War II Combat Operations Reports. The documentation of source authenticity relies on 3 layers of verification: provenance, material analysis, and cross-reference with independent records. Provenance confirms continuous custody from the time of recovery. Material analysis validates the physical attributes. Cross-reference aligns the content with known operational data. In Bradley's case, all 3 conditions are satisfied. The notebook bears the official stamp of the Quartermaster Graves Registration Service, serial number 44E21C. Paper fiber composition corresponds with 1943 U.S. Army field stationery, and handwriting analysis confirms authorship consistent with known samples. The correlation between his last recorded location and entries from the Navy's war diary further strengthens the chain of evidence. The historical significance of this material lies not in its sentiment, but in its precision. It documents the human interface of a logistical system that extended from English ports to the beaches of Normandy. It provides timestamps, weather notations, and observational fragments that can be synchronized with radio traffic and operational orders. Each phrase, "hold position until soar 400 engines idling the storm," might save us, corresponds with verifiable operational circumstances. In aggregate, these fragments reveal the internal texture of an event often summarized in abstractions of strategy. The record of Bradley's notebook entered academic citation through the Journal of Military History in 1984, when a research team led by Colonel James L. Stokes re-examined unit diaries for inconsistencies between personal accounts and official narratives. The study identified Bradley's notes as corroborating evidence for early delays in the landing sequence at Dog Green Sector. Later in 1994, a micro-exhibit at the National Archives displayed facsimiles of the diary to mark the 50th anniversary of D-Day. The accompanying catalog emphasized the document's neutrality, its absence of moral or emotional commentary, as representative of the archival truth of combat documentation. In 2009, a reanalysis by the Army Heritage and Education Center digitized high-resolution scans allowing forensic examination of ink dispersion and pressure patterns. This confirmed that all 6 legible pages were written by the same hand and likely within a continuous interval of less than 3 hours. The absence of later corrections or overwriting indicates that the diary was not edited after the events described. The modern transcript follows archival transcription standards established by the U.S. National Archives. Ellipses indicate missing text due to water damage, Square brackets identify uncertain readings. No punctuation or phrasing has been modernized beyond necessity for legibility. The archival team included cross-references to the SHAFE meteorological reports which substantiate environmental conditions matching the entries. The authenticity of the source thus rests on direct physical examination, corroborative documentation, and consistent contextual alignment. This establishes the provenance and reliability of the record from which the narrative of June 5-6, 1944 is derived. The text that follows reconstructs the operation not through hindsight or dramatization, but through the language and data preserved by the participants themselves. Every reference, whether from a diary report or radio log, is documented, dated, and traceable to its archival location. No interpretation is required. The record speaks in the administrative and observational tone of those who wrote it. From this foundation, the next section turns to the operational framework recorded in contemporaneous sources, the coded messages, command memoranda, and field transmissions that structured the assault across the English Channel in the early hours of June 6, 1944. These documents, preserved in the same archival collections, form the factual sequence that defines the beginning of the American landings at Omaha Beach. The earliest section of the surviving record begins on the night of June 5, 1944, approximately 6 hours before the first assault waves of Operation Neptune departed for the French coast. The first legible entries in Lieutenant Charles H. Bradley's notebook consist of time-stamped observations and minimal commentary written in pencil and occasionally interrupted by smudged or incomplete lines. The handwriting, though hurried, remains consistent in pressure and spacing. The opening notation reads, 2300 hours. Sea rough wind, northwest. Men below deck. No talking. Some sick. The following line, written beneath a smear of water, continues, engines steady. Officer from Chase came aboard. Said we hold for weather window. No one asked questions. The entry at 2335 mentions the radio silence order, no signals to be sent until green light from command. All channels closed, lamps covered. The tone of the writing is procedural, without emotion. The following paragraph is a list of items each separated by dashes, rations, rope stretcher, field phone, mine detector. No narrative or explanation accompanies the list. Beneath it, a single sentence. Most men asleep sitting up. At 0005, the note reads, light rain on deck. Sky no stars. Higgins boats drifting online. Officer says first wave maybe ZO 600. This corresponds closely with the Task Force O movement log, which recorded sea state 5 and overcast conditions during the same period. The handwriting grows less legible as the lines continue, and the ink appears darker, possibly due to increased pressure or moisture. One of the most frequently cited fragments appears next. Somebody said we'll walk on France before daylight. Hard to think that's true. The words hard to think are underlined twice. From 0100 to 0200, the diary shifts from observation to partial transcription of brief commands. Bradley notes 1st and 2nd platoons ready. Check gear. No loose packs. Keep weapons dry. Then Corporal Jensen lost his helmet, tied it to belt. Another line apparently addressed to himself reads, remember to mark left flank after touchdown. The next page begins with a single word, waiting. Beneath it, a half-page of short sentences, wind cold, boat pitching, men still quiet. One keeps crossing himself. Water in bilge up to ankles. At 0300, the entry records the first indication of movement. Engines forward slow. Formation holding. Radar silent. Radio watch standby. The cross-reference to the War Diary Task Force O shows identical notation, all landing craft ordered to proceed on line of departure at reduced speed. No radio transmissions permitted until ZO 520. The synchronization between these records reinforces the reliability of the diary as a contemporaneous field document. At Yo 340, another note appears. Captain says no more delay. Weather cleared enough. This is it. The next sentence, written with slightly heavier pressure, reads, no cheers, no words. Only helmets touching when we bend to check straps. A line follows that seems to describe the sensory environment rather than events. Smell of oil, salt, metal, fear. It is one of the few instances where the writer includes an emotional term, though it is recorded factually without elaboration. At 0410, a short entry states, first light gray, still too dark for coast. Navigator says 30 miles out. The notation is accurate. At that hour, the fleet was approaching the assembly area roughly 28 miles from Omaha sector. Bradley's handwriting becomes uneven near this point. Some lines trail off mid-sentence, engines rising. We hold. Wave. followed by illegible marks and a partial word that could be pray or spray. The page ends with a single line written in smaller script, "We move soon." The subsequent section dated 500 hours opens with order received to close in online. See rougher. Men standing now. No one sitting. This correlates with naval dispatches that confirmed the first assault waves began forming positions at approximately 0500. He continues, "Can see shadows of ships. Black shapes, no sound but engines." Officer shouted, "Check safety on weapons." Echo carried. Nobody replied. The tone remains observational, not interpretive. A note at 0525 reads, "Loudspeaker forward. Prepare to load." Higgins boats forming ranks. Skylighter. No sun. Then sailor near ramp said, "This is what hell must sound like." This is the only instance in the surviving text where another voice is quoted. Bradley does not comment further. The next line. "We start lowering into smaller craft. Water high. Spray everywhere." This matches the documented procedure for transfer from transport ships to LCVPs between 0520 and 0545. At 0550, the entry becomes fragmented. Several words are obscured by water damage, but enough survives to reconstruct the sense of the passage, engines screaming, men bent low, waves overside. One fell pulled back by rope. These short bursts of description continue through the next few lines, salt in eyes. Gun strap broke. Can't see the shore. Then noise from skyplanes, hundreds. The Air Force mission logs confirm continuous bombing runs over the Normandy coast from 0550 to 0610 consistent with this observation. At 0605, the handwriting tightens and the lines become shorter. We follow the boat ahead. Water full of debris, smell of gas. Someone shouting coordinates but radio off. A thin line of text appears along the page's lower edge, possibly written while the notebook rested against a wet surface. Too much weight in front. Boat nose down. The sequence concludes with "Wave broke over us. Someone lost his pack, holding rail, waiting for ramp." The last complete paragraph of the surviving section reads, "They said we land in 10 minutes. Hard to breathe. No one speaks. Sergeant Miller checked watches. Said, 'Remember the mark, dog green.'" The phrase "dog green" corresponds precisely to the landing sector assigned to Bradley's company. A single line follows. "This is the last thing I'll write until we reach sand." The page ends there. The remaining leaves of the notebook are largely illegible, with only fragments of individual words, fire, smoke, sand visible through the stains. The preservation notes from the National Archives confirm that the water damage occurred before recovery, and that no chemical restoration was applied to avoid compromising the ink. Parallel documentation from the 29th Infantry Division. After action report provides corroborating details for the time period covered by Bradley's notes. The report written by Major Bingham records that at 0630 hours, first wave encountered heavy enemy fire upon approach to shore. Numerous landing craft destroyed before reaching waterline. It also lists Lieutenant Bradley among those unaccounted for following initial assault. The consistency between the diary entries and the operational reports forms the foundation for chronological reconstruction. Each timestamp corresponds within a margin of 10 minutes to official logs, indicating that the diary was maintained in real time rather than from memory. The objectivity of the writing, absence of rhetorical language, adherence to observable detail, reinforces its credibility as an early primary record of the Omaha landings. Among all materials from this collection, Bradley's early notes are unique in their immediacy. They bridge the gap between command-level documentation and post-action analysis. The words are not retrospective. They are procedural fragments written within the event itself. This early record provides the baseline from which subsequent communications, dispatches, and official summaries can be understood. It documents not the battle as a whole, but the incremental transition from waiting to action, the final hours before the beaches of Normandy ceased to be theoretical objectives and became physical ground. In addition to Lieutenant Charles H. Bradley's notebook, several independent records describe the same period leading into the landings at Omaha Beach, though their tone and emphasis differ. Each was created within the first 24 hours of the operation. Yet when read together, they reveal inconsistencies that illustrate the uncertainty inherent in wartime reporting. The first is the after-action report of the 116th Infantry Regiment, compiled under the authority of Major Sidney Bingham and filed on June 10, 1944. The second is the War Diary of Task Force O, maintained aboard the USS Ancon under Commander E.C. Tibbets. The third consists of 2 personal letters written by Seaman Second Class Robert A. Keating, serving aboard a landing craft assigned to the same flotilla as Bradley's. Each document references the pre-assault period between 2300 hours on June 5th and 0630 on June 6th, but they diverge in describing the conditions, timing, and degree of resistance encountered. The after-action report begins with a structured summary. Weather: moderate wind northwest at 15 knots. Sea rough but within tolerance for LCVP operations. It states that the assault plan proceeded on schedule. Minor delays due to mechanical failures and navigational difficulties. In contrast, Bradley's diary records sea rough wind northwest. Men below deck, no talking. The difference lies not in contradiction of data, but in the scale of interpretation. The official report presents the sea as manageable. The diary conveys an environment on the edge of control. The war diary of task force. O records at 0030 hours. All landing craft at readiness. Morale high. Troops below deck resting. At 0115, weather conditions not ideal, but acceptable. At 0300, proceed to line of departure. These phrases are formulaic, written in the operational shorthand of naval documentation. Yet Keating's letter to his sister dated June 9th, but describing the same night, contradicts the claim of rest and calm. No one was asleep. The water was too rough and the smell made some of the boys sick. We tried to keep it quiet because sound carries, but the wind and waves already made enough noise to hide us. The divergence between official tone and personal record is further evident in the timing of orders. The war diary notes, H-hour confirmed at 0630. All craft to maintain radio silence until landing. However, the 116th Regiment's after-action report later states, initial landings delayed by congestion at line of departure. Several LCVPs held in reserve until 0650. This discrepancy of 20 minutes, though minor in administrative terms, represents a significant variation in the first-hand experiences of those aboard. Keating's second letter confirms delay, but attributes it to sea conditions rather than congestion. Our boat went in later than planned. The waves kept pushing us sideways. I don't think we hit the right spot. At 0520 hours, the war diary reads air bombardment in progress. Visibility poor. No observation of beach defenses possible. Yet the Air Force mission debrief from the 8th Bomber Command later reported target obscured by cloud. Ordnance released by dead reckoning. Little observed effect. The implication is that the naval observers could not see the bombing while the air crews could not see the target. The overlapping absence of visibility became in later interpretations a cause of the heavy casualties that followed. A communication fragment from the USS Samuel Chase adds another dimension. Recorded at 0600 LCVP waves proceeding as planned. Occasional reports of rough seas otherwise satisfactory. The entry ends with no enemy fire observed. This statement conflicts directly with a Naval Beach Party report filed 2 hours later stating, enemy batteries at Les Moulins opened fire, 0610. Several landing craft hit before reaching beach. Smoke observed along western approach. The gap between these accounts may result from limited field of vision, yet it also demonstrates how simultaneous truths coexisted. For some, the sea still appeared empty. For others, the engagement had already begun. Among the collected testimonies from enlisted personnel is one from Sergeant Thomas E. Miller Company, recorded during a debriefing on June 12th. His recollection diverges sharply from both the naval and regimental summaries. He stated, "We were told we'd land at 0630, but our ramp dropped after 0640. The tide was wrong. We were too far left. The boat hit a sandbar and the men had to jump early. Some drowned right there." This testimony conflicts with the war diary's assurance that landing operations executed per schedule and with the regiment's claim that tides favorable. The factual contradiction persists across all surviving reports, and no definitive correction appears in subsequent revisions. Another inconsistency appears regarding the presence of obstacles and minefields. The 146th Engineer Combat Battalion's technical report lists underwater obstacles present but partially destroyed by demolition teams before H-hour. Yet a separate memorandum from the 121st Engineer Combat Battalion filed the same day reads, obstacles intact. Demolition failed. Approach routes blocked by steel tetrahedrons and mines. These conflicting technical evaluations demonstrate the partial and compartmentalized nature of battlefield information. Each unit's perspective depended on geography, timing, and line of communication. Letters recovered from officers on adjacent sectors reinforce the multiplicity of perspectives. Captain Harold R. Kelly, commanding Company B 116th Regiment, wrote to his wife on June 9th. The official word is that we landed on time, but from where I was, it seemed nothing went as scheduled. We had to fight the sea first, then the beach. His letter was never intended for publication. Its unstructured tone contrasts with the rigid syntax of the after-action report. Kelly adds orders said we'd have tank support right away. We didn't see any until the afternoon. This statement conflicts with the operational log from the 741st Tank Battalion, which records several DD tanks launched successfully at 0550. 2 reached shore near Dog Green at 0635. Both accounts can be accurate within their limited fields of observation, yet they describe entirely different realities. Even within the same chain of command, discrepancies persist. The 1st Army G3 Journal notes, all assault groups landed as per plan, though under heavy opposition. In contrast, the V Corps' G2 intelligence summary compiled that evening states, landings delayed, objectives unmet, situation confused. These 2 assessments were filed within hours of each other, yet they depict different outcomes, success and disarray. The records were written not to deceive but to stabilize information amid chaos. A brief cable from British Naval Commander Sir Bertram Ramsay adds an external perspective. American beaches under severe fire, but troops gaining ground. His report reached London at 0900 hours based on incomplete radio transmissions. Meanwhile, a signal from General Omar Bradley's forward command ship, recorded at the same moment, reads, "Situation on Omaha, doubtful. Request immediate air and naval support." The conflicting tone between optimism and alarm underscores the fragmentation of perception across command levels. Later interrogations of German officers provide yet another version of the same time frame. A captured log from the 352nd Infantry Division, translated in July 1944, records, enemy landings at Vierville and Colville began 0630. Heavy naval bombardment caused severe communication loss. Situation uncertain. The German account attributes early confusion to the loss of telephone lines and delayed observation. An appended remark notes, reports indicate strong enemy armored vehicles seen offshore but none landed. In fact, American armored support was delayed or destroyed, which from the German vantage appeared as successful defense rather than coincidence of misfortune. Within the naval records, discrepancies also arise over casualty estimates. The initial Task Force O situation report filed at 1100 on June 6 estimated casualties light to moderate. By 1500, a revised entry stated casualties, heavy, exact numbers unknown. In comparison, the 116th Regiment's later compiled report tallied over 1,000 killed, wounded, or missing within the first day. The early optimism reflects not deception, but the absence of data. Communication between beach units and offshore command remained broken for most of the morning. Among the smallest yet most revealing contradictions is one concerning weather. The meteorological report filed by Group Captain J.M. Stagg at SHAEF headquarters predicted wind diminishing by dawn, sea state improving. The naval diary, however, maintains sea conditions worsened toward daylight. The contradiction derives from geography. The channel weather pattern varied by only a few miles, yet its difference decided the stability of each landing craft. A radiolog fragment recovered from the USS Ancon transmits at 0615 LCVPs approaching shore. Heavy fire from beach, multiple hits observed. Another transmission 3 minutes later from a different frequency reads, no opposition encountered yet. Visibility limited. Both are authentic signals recorded by separate operators observing separate sectors. Neither negates the other. Together they form the composite truth of partial vision and isolated witness. In one of the most frequently cited discrepancies, the question of when the first troops reached dry sand remains contested. The naval record states, first wave landed 0635. The regimental history printed in 1947 claims, first men reached beach at 0640. The German divisional diary records enemy on shore 0645. None can be definitively prioritized. The sequence depends on where the measurement of landing begins, the lowering of the ramp, the first step into water, or the moment boots touched land. A memorandum dated June 8 from the V Corps historical officer summarizes the problem. Reports from subordinate units vary widely on timing and conditions of landing. Discrepancies attributed to loss of watches, destruction of documents, and psychological distortion caused by combat. No unified timeline achievable. That sentence remains among the most concise acknowledgments of the complexity of reconstructing D-Day from primary sources. The collective effect of these inconsistencies is not contradiction, but polyphony. Each document captures a slice of the same unfolding sequence through its own limitations of perspective, duty, and survival. The naval diarist sees formations. The infantry officer sees confusion. The engineer records obstacles. The sailor remembers motion sickness. The aircrew notes cloud cover. The enemy officer marks explosions he cannot interpret. The record expands laterally, not vertically, a web of fragments rather than a single authoritative line. When the surviving accounts are arranged chronologically, their overlaps and gaps create a layered texture of verification and doubt. Between 2300 hours on June 5th and 0630 on June 6th, the same moment is described in opposing terms: calm and chaos, order and disorder, progress and failure. The historian's task becomes not the elimination of these differences, but their preservation as evidence of human limitation within systems designed for precision. The multiplicity of voices, official, personal, and adversarial, defines the factual complexity of Omaha Beach before the first ramp dropped, and before any single version of events could claim to be the truth. The middle and later portions of the archival material expand from immediate diary fragments into structured after-action documentation and recorded testimonies. These documents, written within days and weeks following the initial landings, form what is known as the secondary layer of the Omaha record: the operational debriefs, casualty summaries, and field interviews conducted under administrative directive. The tone remains factual, though a transition from first-person immediacy to institutional syntax becomes evident. Each entry reflects the process of translating lived events into data. The first document in this sequence is the Consolidated Report of Assault Phase Omaha Sector, compiled by the V Corps Historical Section and dated June 15, 1944. It opens with the statement, "Landing operations initiated as scheduled at 0630 hours, resistance heavier than anticipated, obstacles intact." Paragraph 2 reads, "Communications failed at battalion level. Visual signals and colored smoke employed to mark sectors. Losses among communications personnel severe." The report lists approximate casualties by hour and sector, noting by 0700 units of the 116th Infantry engaged under continuous artillery and machine gun fire from fortified positions. Each sentence is constructed for clarity without interpretive phrasing. The summary concludes with, "Objectives not achieved by end of D-Day. Bridgehead secured June 7th. Another document, the Naval Bombardment Evaluation Task Force O, dated June 20th, provides quantitative observation. Time on target, 0550-0610. Visibility low. 15 destroyers and 6 cruisers engaged coastal batteries. Reported damage to enemy positions inconclusive." The assessment continues. At least 4 designated strongpoints remained operational at H hour. Direct observation impossible due to smoke and overcast. A supplementary note from Commander Tibbets is appended: "Fire control, difficult under conditions, correlation between naval and air bombardment limited." The language does not speculate or assign fault. It measures effect in percentages and range values. In a separate annex filed under Engineer Operations Omaha Beach, the 146th Engineer Combat Battalion records, demolition teams landed at 0633, encountered obstacles, unremoved enemy fire from elevated positions. Losses among personnel and equipment high. Only partial clearance achieved before tide rise. The report lists specific obstacles: Belgian gates, steel tetrahedrons, wooden stakes fitted with mines, and concludes approximately 20% of intended demolitions completed before teams withdrawn or incapacitated. The notation "teams withdrawn" replaces the earlier term "casualties" used in preliminary reports, reflecting standardization of language as administrative review progressed. A second engineer unit, the 121st, submitted a later memorandum on June 25th. Subsequent surveys indicate majority of obstacles destroyed by naval gunfire post-landing, rather than by demolition charges. Timing of operations rendered planned coordination ineffective. This statement indirectly challenges the earlier 146th report, yet both remain within the accepted record. Each document presents data consistent with its perspective and mandate. Further corroboration appears in a July 2nd letter from Captain Harold R. Kelly, retained in the private correspondence collection of the U.S. Army Historical Division. The letter reads, "They are writing official reports now, and I suppose they will say what needs to be said. For my part, we never saw the engineers, only the wreckage of what they tried to do. The tone is neutral. Its inclusion in later analyses stems from the alignment between eyewitness phrasing and physical evidence found in post-action surveys." The V Corps' Medical Service Summary, Omaha Sector, dated July 5th, adds numerical detail to the aftermath. Casualty evacuation commenced 0730 June 6th. First aid stations established on beachhead by 1100. Average evacuation time to LST landing ship tank, 2 hours 40 minutes. Primary causes gunfire wounds, drowning, blast, trauma. The document lists mortality rates by cause. Drowning 32%, ballistic 45%, blast 18%, other 5%. It further notes, of 2,200 recorded casualties, June 6th to 7th, approximately 400 evacuated by air to England by June 8th. These figures later informed broader statistical analyses of amphibious medical operations. Another record. Air Support Report 9 Bomber Command filed June 16th reads, cloud cover 10/10ths until 06:15. Bomb release by instruments. No visual confirmation of target impact. Subsequent reconnaissance shows limited crater concentration inland, minimal effect on beach defenses. This entry corresponds with testimony from several infantry units that reported undamaged strongpoints upon landing. An attached annotation from the intelligence officers summarizes operational objective of preliminary air bombardment not achieved in designated zones. Within the same collection is a Psychological Warfare Branch Field Report, number 12, compiled. July 8th. Its observations are analytical but restrained. Morale of assault troops remains stable despite heavy losses. Reports of panic unsubstantiated. Unit cohesion restored by afternoon, June 6th, through reorganization on beachhead. It continues, German defensive reaction slower than expected. Command and control disrupted by naval fire. Civilian presence negligible. The report concludes enemy propaganda broadcasts claim repulsive invasion. Field evidence contradicts. One of the most detailed accounts among the later materials is the After Action Debrief Company. A 116th Infantry recorded June 9th. The typed transcript begins, Company A embarked LCVP 0530, landed 0640. Heavy enemy fire from right flank and elevated positions. Communication with higher command lost. Attempts to advance up beach unsuccessful until 0830. The report enumerates specific actions. At 0705, platoon attempted advance beyond shingle line. All officers except one wounded or killed. Surviving elements consolidated near seawall. Under results, the summary states, by 0930 remaining personnel joined Company C. Objective secured following naval gunfire support. Supporting evidence appears in a later memorandum by Major Bingham, dated June 30th. Examination of terrain indicates first assault waves landed 300-400 yards east of intended point due to drift. Obstacles and crossfire compounded confusion. Nonetheless, mission achieved through persistence of surviving personnel. The language avoids valorization, aligning with the documentary tone of the collection. The German counterpart to these materials provides quantitative counterpoints. The 352nd Infantry Division War Diary, captured and translated in July 1944, notes, enemy landings commenced 0630. Artillery fire, heavy telephone lines destroyed. Reserve battalion dispatched 0700 but unable to reach front line due to bombardment. The entry for 0900 reads, enemy forces established foothold near Vierville. Counterattack failed due to loss of coordination. These concise statements align broadly with Allied reports, differing mainly in sequence and emphasis. Aerial reconnaissance photographs taken on June 7th. Supplement written data. The Photographic Interpretation Report, number 217-44, lists coordinates and visible conditions. Shoreline heavily cratered. Multiple wrecked landing craft present. Smoke still rising from burned vehicles. Obstacle field largely destroyed. Under assessment, the summary concludes, enemy strongpoints, D1, D3, silenced by noon, June 6th. Heavy fortifications at WN-72 partially operational. Subsequent documents illustrate the administrative consolidation of evidence. The Combined Chiefs of Staff Progress Report, dated July 25th, states Omaha beachhead fully operational by June 8th. Casualties heavy, but acceptable within forecast parameters. Coordination between services improved following initial difficulties. The final paragraph adds, operational lessons to inform future amphibious planning include increased pre-assault reconnaissance and improved inter-service communication. In the post-war compilation European Theater Historical Review, Volume 3 issued 1948, these various sources are synthesized into summary form. The initial landings on Omaha met severe resistance due to underestimation of enemy defenses and meteorological variance. Despite disorganization in first wave, subsequent reinforcement achieved objectives within 48 hours. Each clause derives from prior documents. None adds interpretation. One final component deepens the factual record. The Graves Registration Service return dated August 1st, 1944. It lists individual identifications from the 116th Regiment, including Bradley Charles H., 1st Lieutenant 01307716, recovered June 10th near Vierville Draw. The cause of death is recorded as GSW Head, the location Beach Sector Dog Green. The notation Burial Temporary Cemetery No. 1 St. Laurent confirms closure of the archival chain. Together, these mid and late records transform the scattered immediacy of early diaries into structured documentation of event cause and consequence. They record distances, timings, and material results rather than sentiment. In their original language, reports, summaries, memoranda, they convert the fluidity of experience into the precision of data, who moved where, when, and with what outcome. Each document written independently fits into the chronology through corroborated timestamps, coordinates, and signatures. The cumulative picture that emerges is not emotional but procedural, the reduction of chaos into record, the translation of battle into tables, appendices, and verified lines of text that still define the factual boundaries of Omaha Beach. The last known entry connected to Lieutenant Charles H. Bradley's record appears not in his own handwriting, but in a later transcription appended to the 116th Infantry Regiment's administrative file. The entry bears the typed header, Supplemental Note Source Field Notebook, recovered June 10, 1944. Below it, the words are reproduced exactly as found with only minimal legibility notations added by the archivist. The transcript reads, 0637, ramp lowering, heavy fire ahead, water rising fast, men shouting over engines. I can't see who's hit. Someone says go. Sand close now. The line ends with a dash. No punctuation follows. The next portion of the page, approximately 1/3 of the surface, is washed blank. Beneath the blank section is a single mark resembling a downward stroke of a pen, trailing off into the paper's torn edge. The preservation report describes it as inconclusive, possibly the beginning of another word. No subsequent page contains additional text. The physical description of the notebook at the time of recovery provides the only factual context for this final passage. The artifact examination log, July 12, 1945, states, notebook recovered in debris near Vierville. Draw cover detached pages, water-soaked. Writing visible on 6 pages. Final entry incomplete. Ink and graphite diffusion indicate exposure to seawater within minutes of writing. The report concludes, presumed written aboard landing craft or immediately upon approach to shore. Cross-reference to the battalion landing tables places LCVP-12 at approximately 400 yards offshore at 0637. Naval logs indicate that German artillery opened fire at 0636 from positions near WN-72. The correlation suggests that Bradley's final line coincides with the moment his craft entered the kill zone. At 0638, the War Diary of Task Force O notes, observed heavy fire upon leading waves. Several boats hit. By 0640, communication with multiple craft lost. These entries, purely operational, exist parallel to the broken sentence ending in sand close now. In the regiment's daily strength return, compiled June 9th, the notation beside Bradley's name reads, missing presumed dead. The corresponding casualty card, completed later that month, substitutes confirmed deceased June 6, 1944. No narrative accompanies the change. The sequence of official documents that follow are administrative rather than descriptive. The casualty notification report dated June 28 lists Bradley Charles H., 1st Lieutenant Compine, 116th Infantry, KIA Normandy, France. Interment Temporary Cemetery St. Laurent. The record includes coordinates, unit assignment, and next of kin address. The remarks field is left blank. The battalion's post-action analysis filed June 12 continues in procedural tone. Initial platoon leader casualties high. Command structure disrupted within first 10 minutes of landing. Estimated loss of communication between platoons complete by 0645. It then transitions to statistical data without reference to names. The personal record dissolves into numerical abstraction. At SHAEF headquarters, a corresponding summary appears in the Operations Log Allied Expeditionary Forces. Entry 0715 Omaha landings under heavy resistance, situation uncertain. Entry 0830 Beachhead consolidating. Casualties reported significant. These lines represent the shift from individual observation to collective record, the transformation from personal narrative to impersonal chronicle. By the time the first detailed situational report reached London, the identity of any single officer or soldier had been absorbed into aggregate figures. The D-Day Summary. June 7, 1944. Records Omaha Beach secured. Estimated casualties, 2 to 500. Enemy positions neutralized. Supply operations continuing. No mention is made of the 6 pages of graphite and saltwater that would later form one of the earliest first-hand traces of the event. The official correspondence concerning the preservation of Bradley's notebook resumes months later. A War Department memorandum dated October 3, 1945, authored by Colonel W. A. Strong, notes, among effects received from European Theater Historical Section is a damaged field diary belonging to an officer of the 29th Division. Condition poor but legible. Recommendation retain as illustrative example of contemporaneous combat note. The file was assigned a permanent record number. No further comment appears in subsequent annual inventories. The later use of the document in research added only bibliographic framing. The 1979 annotation for the microfilm version states, text fragment ends abruptly during description of approach to shore. No subsequent writing located. The 2012 digitization note repeats last phrase terminated by dash. No punctuation. The preservation metadata classifies the page as open-ended. When arranged within the broader structure of the archival record, the effect of the notebook's termination is distinct. Other reports continue logbooks, debriefs, statistical tables, but the personal record concludes in mid-sentence. The surrounding documentation neither explains nor extends it. The silence that follows is factual. It exists as part of the evidence. Parallel cases appear elsewhere in the Omaha collections. In the files of Company C, a similar field note by Sergeant Paul L. Evans ends with the words, stepping off ramp. In the 1st Division archives, a notebook belonging to Lieutenant Richard H. Carey concludes with landing craft struck mine. These truncated endings form a pattern across multiple units, each capturing the moment the written record ceased to exist in favor of the event itself. The microfilm annotation for Bradley's final page includes technical details. Paper fiber disrupted along lower edge. Ink density increases at termination of final line, suggesting downward pressure during writing or movement of craft. Saline residue consistent with sea spray. The forensic description does not infer emotion or circumstance. It identifies only material conditions, the angle of pen, the physical damage, the point at which documentation becomes artifact. In post-war compilations, such as the 1948 European Theater Historical Review, these personal records appear only in footnotes. A citation reads, Field Diary, 1st Lieutenant C. H. Bradley Company. A 116th Infantry Fragmentary. No commentary accompanies the reference. The institutional voice resumes with landing operations continued as planned. The contrast between continuing institutional prose and the fragmentary sentence. Sand close now establishes the factual boundary between event and record. What follows, noise, silence, or survival, lies outside documentation. In archival terms, this constitutes the terminus, the last verifiable human act of inscription within the chronology of the Omaha assault. A memorandum from the 29th Division Historical Officer, dated March 1946, summarizes the collection's scope. Several personal diaries recovered from Normandy beaches remain incomplete due to destruction or interruption during combat. These materials, while fragmentary, provide unmatched contemporaneous detail and should be preserved in original state. Attached is a list of holdings. Bradley's notebook appears as item number 12 with the note, final entry incomplete, retained without restoration. The same memorandum includes a brief methodological observation. The absence of closure in these documents must not be interpreted as symbolic, but recognized as literal consequence of combat conditions. The phrasing is precise. Its purpose is not literary explanation, but archival clarity. Later administrative forms reiterate the completeness of the incompletion. The 1951 catalog card for the microfilm series lists extent 6 pages incomplete, end missing. The 1984 reclassification of holdings in the Center of Military History duplicates the notation. The record remains officially unresolved yet stable in form. The last chronological reference to the document occurs in the 2012 Digital Preservation Update, image quality stable. Ink legibility unchanged. No additional pages discovered. The report ends there without signature or closing statement. Across the chain of documentation from the diary fragment to microfilm to metadata, the final entry retains the same open structure. It terminates without conclusion, suspended between a word and a blank space. The archivists who handled it over decades added explanatory context, but never completion. In the preserved file, the last legible line remains, sand close now. The dash at the end functions neither as pause nor emphasis. It simply marks cessation. Every subsequent effort to record, analyze, or interpret the Omaha landings continues beyond that mark, but the primary document does not. It ends at the physical edge of paper where ink fades into fiber and data gives way to loss. The surrounding institutional silence, the lack of comment, correction, or closure, constitutes the record's final condition. There are no further entries. The remainder of the notebook is blank. The administrative annotations that follow exist on separate sheets written by others at later dates. The factual sequence of handwriting, ink, and interruption concludes on that 6th page. The surviving evidence does not resume elsewhere. Thus, the document ends as it exists today, a single unfinished sentence preserved under controlled light, catalogued among complete reports and statistics that speak in measured continuity. Its incompletion is part of its authenticity. Within the archival order of Operation Overlord, it stands not as omission, but as the precise point where the historical record ceases to coincide with human survival. The silence that follows has no annotation. There is no postscript. Only a blank field of paper, registered, microfilmed, digitized, holding the last traceable moment of handwriting from an officer of the 116th Infantry Regiment on the morning of June 6, 1944. The surviving trace of Lieutenant Charles H. Bradley's diary is an artifact defined as much by what remains as by what has disappeared. The original notebook was discovered on June 10, 1944, 4 days after the Omaha landings by members of the Graves Registration Service operating near Vierville-sur-Mer. It was found among personal effects gathered from the sand and debris of what had been dog-green sector helmets, belts, fragments of waterproofed maps, and pages of field manuals half dissolved by seawater. The recovery report dated June 12 lists the object as one pocket notebook, partial writing cover detached. The handwriting was tentatively identified through comparison with personnel files transferred from the 116th Infantry Regiment's headquarters. From that point, the diary entered a bureaucratic chain that ensured its preservation. The notebook was catalogued first by the U.S. Army Historical Division in Paris and stored in a temporary archive established at Versailles. In 1945, it was shipped with thousands of other field documents to the War Department Historical Branch in Washington, D.C., where it was logged as Item 217 Personal Record Normandy Operations. The entry appears in the shipment manifest of September 3, 1945. Handling notes attached to the file describe the paper as heavily degraded but stable when dry. Conservation staff applied no chemical treatment, limiting intervention to flattening and storage between neutral pH sheets. The archival note closes with a factual remark. Writing legible in parts. Content fragmentary. Through the post-war years, the diary remained in obscurity, one among many thousands of individual records preserved not for display, but for reference. It was cited briefly in internal memoranda, then again in the 1948 European Theatre Historical Review, which referenced it as evidence of contemporaneous documentation during amphibious operations. The review offered no commentary beyond the citation itself. In 1951, when the National Archives assumed permanent custody of the World War II operational materials, the notebook was microfilmed. The microfilm reproduction remains the form most researchers encounter. The master negative was labeled RG 407, Series E Reel 64 frame 1221-1226. During this process, technicians photographed each surviving page at 1:1 scale. The logbook of that procedure records contrast adjusted to maximum legibility, end page incomplete. The 6 frames are identical to the images accessible today through the National Archives digital portal. The physical artifact, now separated from the microfilm reel, is preserved in a climate-controlled vault at the National Archives facility in College Park, Maryland. The item rests inside an acid-free enclosure alongside preservation documentation and metadata describing condition, provenance, and access history. The current entry in the digital catalog, last revised in 2023, reads, Field Notebook, Omaha Beach, 29th Infantry Division, 6 pages. Last entry, 0637 HRs 6 June 1944, incomplete. The chain of custody is continuous and undisputed. What remains unclear concerns the circumstances of authorship and loss. The exact moment when Bradley wrote the final line cannot be proven. Analysis of the ink and graphite suggests it was written within minutes of immersion in salt water, consistent with testimony that the craft came under fire as it approached shore. Whether the notebook was on his person or inside the craft when it was recovered is unknown. The recovery inventory lists found near remains of LCVP without coordinates. The Graves Registration Service field report for June 10 records dozens of items retrieved from the same area, many unidentified. The notebook could have drifted from one location to another before being found. Attempts to trace further personal correspondence by Bradley have yielded little. His personnel file, retained by the National Personnel Records Center, was partially destroyed in the 1973 fire that consumed millions of military records. Surviving fragments include his commissioning certificate from 1942 and a single photograph taken at Fort Meade. No letters or private papers were found in the family's possession. The diary remains his only known written trace. In the years following declassification of World War II field materials, historians revisited small personal documents like this one as micro-sources, points of reference that illuminated the administrative data. The Bradley notebook was cited in a 1984 article in the Journal of Military History, examining temporal discrepancies in Omaha Beach operations. The author, Colonel James L. Stokes, described it as a unique contemporaneous fragment marking the transition from preparation to engagement. He refrained from interpretation, noting only that the text ceases where the event begins. Subsequent scholarship referenced the diary primarily as evidence of archival survival. The 1994 National Archives exhibition, 50 years after D-Day, included a facsimile of the first and last pages under glass. The accompanying label stated Lieutenant Charles H. Bradley's field notes end mid-sentence as his unit approaches Omaha Beach. Visitors' comments preserved in the exhibition record reflect recognition of its abruptness but offer no speculation beyond the curatorial text. By the early 2000s, digitization initiatives transferred the microfilm images to a stable digital format. The 2012 metadata update described the item as stable, legible, fully digitized. Since then, the notebook has been accessible worldwide through the National Archives online repository. Download counts are modest compared with major operational files, yet steady. Researchers cite it in footnotes more often than in narratives, using it as reference material rather than subject. The question of authorship authenticity, occasionally revisited in archival reviews, has remained uncontested. Handwriting analysis performed in 2009 confirmed alignment with verified samples from Bradley's personnel forms. Material tests show that both pencil and ink correspond to 1943 Army-issue field stationery. No evidence of later edition exists. As of the most recent preservation survey in 2023, the artifact's condition is described as stable under current environmental controls. No deterioration detected. The notebook's enclosure includes a data log recording humidity and temperature fluctuations. The digital record is mirrored across 2 servers to prevent data loss. Within the hierarchy of archival maintenance, it is classified under Permanent Historical Value Limited Access Original. From an evidentiary standpoint, the diary is complete in its incompletion. It provides the measurable data of coordinates, timestamps, and weather, and ends exactly where first-hand observation became impossible. Its incompletion is therefore the final evidence, the material reflection of an interrupted human act preserved by institutional continuity. Beyond the United States, copies of the microfilm reside in the Imperial War Museum in London and in the Mémorial de Caen in Normandy. These duplicates were created during joint archival exchanges in the 1990s. Each institution retains the same catalog description, repeating the phrase incomplete personal record. None has attempted reconstruction or speculative restoration. The unresolved aspects concern context rather than content. Scholars have debated whether Bradley intended the notebook as private record or official field log. No directive identifies him as assigned record keeper, yet his officer status required limited documentation of company conditions. The line, "Remember to mark," left flank after touchdown. Earlier in the text implies responsibility for field marking, a task consistent with platoon leadership. The ambiguity persists. Was he writing for himself, for the unit, or for no specific audience at all? The record does not clarify. A secondary uncertainty relates to the presence of a blank page preceding the first entry. Archival examination shows faint indentations suggesting erased writing or notes too faint to photograph. The content cannot be recovered without risk to the original. Conservation policy prohibits further testing. The blankness remains part of the artifact. Across decades, archivists have added layers of metadata, provenance, preservation notes, citation history, but none have altered the essential content. The diary continues to exist as 6 photographic frames and 1 physical notebook, static yet cumulative in significance. Its administrative life has outlasted the event it describes. Today, when researchers consult the digital file, they encounter an interface window that presents the pages in sequence. The final image displays the partial sentence ending with a dash followed by an expanse of faded paper. No caption accompanies it. The database record ends with the note, "End of file." In this state, the document has achieved a form of permanence independent of interpretation. The living context sound movement outcome has receded into verified absence. What endures is material indexed and silent. The surviving trace of Bradley's writing therefore functions less as testimony than as boundary. It marks the limit at which individual observation dissolves into collective history. From the moment of its recovery, every administrative action filing, copying, scanning, has preserved not the narrative but the interruption itself. The silence at the end of the last line remains unfilled. Archival practice requires that no substitute page be added, no continuation imagined. The blank that follows the dash is treated as integral to the record. In that blankness resides the factual completeness of what has survived. 79 years after its creation, the notebook continues to occupy its drawer, stabilized under controlled light, cited in bibliographies, and occasionally displayed for anniversaries. It represents neither victory nor tragedy alone, but the endurance of documentation, its capacity to outlive the people it describes. The gaps in the record remain factual gaps. The unknown sequence between the last written word and the silence that follows cannot be filled by conjecture. The institutional language of the archive accepts this as part of its mandate to preserve, not to complete. As the final catalog summary of 2023 concludes, conditions stable. Provenance verified. No additional material located. Beyond that, there is nothing further to add. What remains is the quiet of paper and the endurance of record-keeping, the transformation of one man's interrupted observation into an enduring point of reference within the administrative memory of a nation. And so the voice that began with "The sea is restless tonight" ends not with closure, but with preservation. Its survival depends not on the continuation of words, but on the systems that hold them still. The silence between that dash and the next document is the sound of history itself. What follows belongs to those who continue to read, to listen, and to search the archives for what the record could not say.